Now, I don't know. Um, we'll probably cover most of the stuff that I wanted to cover fairly quickly, but I also wanted to talk quite a bit more about next week's thing, which is the contemporary art and processes. And I'm hoping both of you, Dana, what's your background again? Are you a photographer or a graphic designer?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I paint, but I'm
You
going
paint.
into
Okay.
graphic design. Yeah.
Okay. And Kylie, you're a sculptor. Did you ever look up Camille
Yeah,
Claudel?
I did actually.
Did you see that there's a French language movie about her done, I think, late 80s, early 90s? Did you ever come across
Actually,
that?
yes, I did see that. Well, yeah,
Okay.
I thought that had been done. I definitely haven't seen it.
Well, it's a really good exploration of the artist's descent into madness. But I still like Camille Claudel. Well, today, oh, and I wanted to ask you too, do you have all your fingers from yesterday? From the
Me?
fireworks and everything? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. I there were some nice fireworks yesterday. We could tell because of the noises. All the dogs were cowering in the laundry room with extra blankets to protect themselves. I'm really very happy we have such stalwart home protectors. It was great. Well, today we are going to be talking about um, the next module, which has to do with texture and color. And we're also going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that I've seen that people have been doing. I am I was all caught up on grading, and then you guys had the audacity to turn more stuff in, so I'm still working on grading some more. I'm trying to stay on top of that. Tanner, have you already done your critique videos?
No, I haven't. I wanted to get a little like further on one of my
Okay,
projects, just have like something better to critique.
all right. That is totally fine. And for the people that are listening to this, um, the people that have done their critiques, was that a weight lifted off, Kylie?
It was good to get done, and it didn't take as much time as I was anticipating.
All right, excellent, very good. So that's a good plug. Anybody who's watching this, I would like to get at least a couple people to get their critiques done, those two videos. And again, there's several different ways that you can do that. And one of the easiest low-tech ways is to have an image of what you're critiquing on the computer and just make a recording with your phone so that nobody sees your face or anything, they just hear your voice. I have had students who've had severe social anxiety who didn't want somebody to hear their voice. I had one student who even used a voice modifier, which is kind of cool because you can program those to make yourself sound like Darth Vader, even, which wouldn't that be a cool artistic critique? Or it's all done by Darth Vader. But and you could even have one of your roommates. You could write out your critique and have them read it, so you don't have to be involved directly in the production of the video at all. But everybody does need to do that. And I did modify one of the assignments, the contemporary art assignment. Um, the ready-made has a component to it where the discussion you just put in your ready-made and you post that what you wrote about it. And I've changed that a little bit so that you have to comment using 25 words or more, if you'd like, on three other students' works. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But you only have to do three comments, and that's one comment each on three different other people's works. And the comment needs to be 25 words long, should be framed with positive language, and it needs to address one of the four tools of artistic critique. Do you folks remember what the four tools of artistic critique are? What's the first one?
Okay, I know I just did this, so I might be wrong, but I think it's description.
Yes, that's exactly right. And what's the second one?
Analysis,
Excellent, perfect. What's the third one?
interpretation.
analysis.
Yeah, that was a tie. Perfect. And what is the last one?
Like your judgment of it.
Right, evaluation. Now, I know you guys, just because you're professional artists, you do this all the time with your own work, but maybe not necessarily using those particular words to identify the different steps. And I know that you do it with other people's work. The only reason we're doing this in the class over and over again is to kind of expand that critique vocabulary. And critical thinking or critique does not mean you bash anything, carve it up, or destroy anything. What it does mean is that you're thinking and articulating your thoughts with intent. So this is designed just to expand your expressive vocabulary when it comes to looking at your own work and examining the work of other people. Have either of you had a moment during this class where you've applied these tools to something and your frame of reference or your opinion about it changes, either expands or becomes completely different? I've actually had a nursing student apply this to case studies. And she said it was fascinating to her because case studies for her were boring and drawn out and just a pain in the neck. But by applying the tools of artistic critique to the case study, she actually came away, she still didn't like it, but she came away appreciating the process and appreciating what the case study was about. So it changed her point of view in reference to that particular learning process. And can you think of a way that these might apply to the other things you do? What kind of jobs do you guys have outside of sculpting and painting?
I think that using the tools of artistic critique was really helpful. I don't work there anymore. My last week was last week. But I worked at an art foundry, and so we had a lot of art and a lot of different kind of art come in. So it was really interesting and really helpful to me to kind of take a look at things and to see what I do like and what I don't like, but also to kind of figure out why. And then also to see pieces that it's like, this isn't my cup of tea, but there's a lot of skill here. And so it was really helpful for me.
I think that's an excellent observation, because I think that is one of the most useful applications of these tools, is whether or not you like something, whether or not you come away thinking, oh yeah, this is the bee's knees, that matters a lot less than the fact that you appreciate the effort that has gone into it. I'm sorry, the lighting on me is changing a bit because one of the dogs has decided that she needs to go outside for a bit. So we're going to sit here. I'm going to sit here and wait in this lighting until she decides she wants to get my attention again, and then it'll change. This little dog, she lives to get up, scratch at the door, have you open the door for her, and then she goes out and then she counts to 50 or whatever dogs count to, scratches on the door again to come back in, and then after a couple minutes she repeats the process. For her, it's great fun, but that's not true for anybody else. Sigh. Anyway, no, I really appreciate that, because, like, especially if you're at a foundry, that kind of awareness and appreciation helps you to do your job better too. What was your particular job at the foundry?
So I had the initial molds. I was working on a piece directly. I'd make them for the silicon rubber mold and then the plaster leather molds as well.
Okay, so I'm sorry, the first part of that cut out quite a bit. You're not doing the chasing, you're doing the prep work for the molding, or for the casting?
Yeah, I do the molds. So the first molds, the
Okay.
silicon rubber mold, and then the plaster.
Okay, all right, that's great. I imagine that if you did not try to honor, or at least respect the work of the artist that you're casting, your quality could potentially be quite different. And that would suck. Yeah, definitely. No, foundry work is not the easiest work of all. But other jobs that I've had, I do stained glass, but I've also done other things. I sold electronic parts at a company like Radio Shack. I don't know if you guys have parents that are old enough to remember Radio Shack, but just interfacing with customers. If you can identify what the actual issue is that's being addressed, as opposed to their emotions, then you can appreciate the situation and find better ways to resolve it. So it works on a lot of different levels. Okay, I'm gonna let this dog back in. It's like 120. Well, it's not 120. It's like 102 degrees down here, where I'm at right now. And I'm afraid if I don't let the dogs in, they will melt into a little puddle of viscous goo. But we shall see. One of the things I wanted to talk about as well is what I'm seeing with people's biomorphic abstraction carvings and paper mache. And what I'm seeing has been really, there's been some really good things. I like that because when we talk about biomorphic abstraction, people have really taken that to heart, learned what it means, and produced some really nice things. Like kind of the item that you critiqued, I thought was a good example of that. You know, one thing, this is something for everybody. When you don't get the perfect score, you can always turn things in, submit things, add to it, redo it, whatever. And there's some concerns that have come up over time. One thing that I'm noticing is, we talked about this, like when people redo quizzes, is you've got to either add it in the comment section or retake the whole quiz. It doesn't allow you just to change individual answers. And that has been, over time, that has been an ongoing frustration for some students until they realize they've got to retake the whole thing. And what I've noticed with this class, this is the first time that absolutely everybody who has retaken a quiz has known that and has taken care of it. So there's never been a problem with retaking quizzes here, which I really appreciate. And I've also noticed that several people have resubmitted things without a problem at all. Now, one issue is if the person already started doing their skin over a wire thing that needed to be redone, how did they get more points for resubmitting the wire thing? And there's a couple ways to do that. One is to add more wire, even though the skin is already on, to make the sculpture into something more with additional wire. Another thing is to create elements that could go on with the wire, describe what you could have done to make it better. Another option is, depending on how difficult it is, restructuring the piece. You know, take some of the skin off and add the wire, more wire on, and then relayer the skin. So there's lots of different kinds of things. I did have one student who was taking this class while she was in Spain, I believe, and even though we had talked about it, she wasn't aware that the last project meant revisiting other projects, and she didn't take anything back home with her on the plane, and was rather upset that she wasn't able to finish the last project. But what we did instead was she was able to recreate some of that, what she had made, and then she added more to it and combined that with photos of other stuff that she had done, and she was still able to show that, or demonstrate that she understood what was going on well enough to get a fairly decent grade. So there's lots of, we're flexible. If something happens and you can't redo something, you can propose something, propose what to do. Like, for example, with these texture tiles, one of the things I say in the assignment is, if you've done everything and you haven't used a lot of time on it, make more of them. And that's a good way of addressing that as well. One thing I'm noticing about the paper mache is that people are taking it seriously, which I really appreciate. A couple years ago, I did have a student that made paper mache and then just draped it over the object that was carved. And that was really, really, really awful. It was pretty bad. I think they may have ended up taking the class again from another teacher, but they did not get a very good score on that because there was no effort made. You know, you guys are professionals. Making the effort counts more than producing a masterwork, I think. Now, this next module talks about texture and color. I think texture is good for a painter to talk about, and color is good for a sculptor to talk about. One of the reasons we know that, I think his name was Severus Septimius, was an African Roman emperor, is because of the microparticles of paint that was found on his bust in England. This a lot of people don't realize, and I think even later Romans didn't realize, that the marble bust, especially during Renaissance, because they thought clean marble was the absolute perfection of sculpture, because that's all they had access to. But the reasons why the Greek and Roman sculptures look like either patinaed bronze or white marble was because the paint that they had applied wore off almost completely over the previous 1,000 years. So they actually did paint their marble busts in Rome and Greece to kind of mimic the presence of the person that they were emulating. And of course, you know, you get people like Michelangelo who had no idea of that. And so he made really clean white marble sculptures, and that was what the Renaissance folks worked with because that's all they had. That's what they knew about it. And so Greek and Roman art became the standard because you know, whatever they did by default was the standard. I think that color and texture are both really important elements to talk about as we get into 3D, because they both respond quite differently and they both do different things to your piece when they're applied or as light hits them, for example. Now I'm going to, I think what I want to do is talk a little bit about these assignments and then go over the quizzes a bit, or the quiz, sorry. And then we'll talk a little bit about contemporary art. So let's see if I can get this. All righty. Okay, I'm going to do a screen share bit here. All right, here we go. Give me just a short 3.5 hours as I figure this out. All right, can you guys see this? Should say texture and color tiles.
Yeah.
Okay. This module, we're kind of doing both things, and we're combining texture and color in the same thing. And you can scroll down a little bit, and you can see the student examples that people have done. And I wanted you to look at these cubes. I thought that you could expand these. I don't know if you can, but these give you an idea of the kinds of things that we're going to be doing with this. I'm sorry, I'm not able to expand these guys very well. But what you're going to end up doing with in this module is making two cubes. One is going to be with textures, and one is going to be with color collages. And with the textures, I like it when somebody spray paints them all the same color, so we only see the texture. And you can see on this sample with the 9 textured squares, the person did a lot of work layering the texture and doing different things with it. And then on the one next, and it's all a uniform color because it's just the raw cardboard. On the one next to it, the person did quite a bit more texture to it. On this, I want you to look at the time that's allotted for the exercise and plan around that. Plan a couple hours to do this. What is really sad is when somebody whips out a dozen different textures really fast and says, okay, I'm all done, and you can tell that not much time was taken. What I really appreciate is when people layer the textures. So if it's not taking as long as you think it should, keep adding more to it. And you can tell this gray one on the left, it looks kind of like a cross between a cityscape and a circuit board. Big part of that is because a person kept layering cardboard over and over. And on the right, they did something very similar as well. There's a lot of texture that we can get just using cardboard. Now, if you make like 8 little curly cues and glue those on, that really doesn't do a whole lot. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the textures. Have you ever taken something called a senses walk? I'm sorry, do either of you ever heard that term or done it before?
I have. I think I must have when I was younger. I'm sure that we definitely did that.
Yeah,
All right,
I think so too.
Okay, good. It's something that college students normally don't do because this is generally for it's a tool to calm people who are on the spectrum. It's also a tool to interact with children that are a little bit hyper. It's very effective for dealing with issues of depression and anxiety. And so I've used it with my own kids. I've used it myself. I have a nephew who's on the spectrum and his parents do this with him. But I think it's really valuable as art students to do this kind of thing. By the way, Kylie, bless you. And
Thanks.
what this, you're welcome. When people talk about how if one sense is kind of missing or inhibited, the other senses kind of expand to fill up that gap, that is true, but it's not always true in the way that you'd expect. One thing that neuroscientists have noticed is that when somebody focuses on something, whatever the subject of their focus is, that expands to fill more and more of their awareness. That is one of the reasons. Now, both of you have had an issue where you look up and you suddenly realize 6 hours has gone by. You can't move your legs because they've gone completely numb. There's hardly any light. You've been focusing so intently on your work that you have literally not noticed anything else. Both of you have had that, haven't you? Yeah, it's another term for that is being in the flow state. For a senses walk, what I want you to do is apply that kind of intense focus to the textures around you. And I'd like you to do this a couple times or several times. And sometimes it's nice to bring like little snack Ziploc bags with you if you're in a place where you can collect textures. But it's nice to do this inside at least once and outside at least once. Inside, you can do it anywhere, but if you do it on campus, I would suggest not stealing any textures in your Ziploc bags. Like going over to the library and doing this in the library would be really good. I think there's a lot of cool stuff there. Going also, if you have a friend that works in the furniture lab, or auto lab, you can go there and do the same kind of thing. That's really cool. Doing this outside, bad idea to do this in a national park because taking any of the texture is illegal. Excuse me. But anywhere else, you can do this. What you're essentially doing is blocking out everything that is not the sensory input from your immediate environment. You go into the library, you walk around slowly, you look very closely at the textures of the backs of the books, the edges of the pages, the carpet. You pay particular attention to how your legs and feet feel, or if you're in a wheelchair, how the wheels feel as you're going across the carpet. You're paying a lot of attention to how things feel if you're able to touch them. You look at things intently so you can imagine how they feel when you touch them. Even smelling is good, particularly in the library. I'm a bookbinder, so I enjoy that kind of smell. But you can smell paper, the binding, especially on a warm day. You can smell sometimes the glue that's been used. Very much so, if you're at the furniture lab or the auto lab, there's going to be a lot of smells there. Most of us dismiss those kinds of things. You're probably not even aware of the unique aromas in your own home because you're so used to that. But the senses walk is an opportunity to kind of open up your senses and pay attention to your senses as much as you possibly can, one at a time. And for this purpose of this class, you're going to pay particular attention to the visual and physical textures. If you can touch the stuff, I'd like you to touch it. When you do this outside, give yourself several minutes to do it as well. And I think you can kind of understand why it would be beneficial to do this several times if you have the time to. While you're outside, feel how the sidewalk feels, or the grass, or the pavement, or the gravel, whatever you're walking on, the sidewalk material. Feel the wind as it brushes against your skin, or through your hair. Feel the heat. I'm in St. George right now, and walking outside from an air-conditioned interior to 114 degrees, bouncing off the pavement, is kind of startling. And then your skin all melts away, and it's fine because you don't feel anything. But consider that as you go through the senses walk, and take your time and really allow your pupils to dilate and focus on the sensory input around you. For the purpose of this class, it's primarily going to be physical and visual texture, but you can also think about, you can also focus on smells and other elements as well. But that's what the senses walk entails. And if you're in an area where you can collect texture elements for the tiles that you make and use them. You can use bark, you can use like the helicopters from sycamore tree, or what, is that right? Helicopters come from, okay. You can use different leaves, all sorts of things like that. Collect several of them, and you can think of creative ways to use those as you make your textures. And it may be that you'll take photos of stuff and use that to inform how you create your visual textures, as you're creating a visual texture using the physical elements of the cardboard tiles. So that's what the senses walk entails. When you create, okay, well, we'll talk about that as we go back to the tiles, physical tiles, in just a little bit. But for the color part, I want to do a screen share again on this and show you something. Now, you guys have probably both used online color wheel websites. And there's some really, really awful ones, but there's some good ones too. And what I found was for this class, was one that I thought was incredibly easy to use. All right, can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, on this, they call it color combinations, and I believe on our page we call it I think we call it color combination types as well. These are the kinds of things, Tanner, I hope there's a better word for it, but like color triads or complementary colors or a color tetrad or monochrome. What are those called?
Those sound right. I'm trying to think. Yeah. No, I have a color wheel by me, and those are the words on it. So that's it.
Okay. Okay, because we do have, and this I think this next quiz we talk a little bit about color and texture, and then the following quiz we talk about it as well a little bit. And there are different color combinations. But what I want you to do, let's see, can you see the color wheel? Let's see, I
No,
think I
I
screwed
can
that up.
still see the texture and
Just the
color
texture
tiles.
color tiles.
Okay, let's see, we'll go to this. All right, can you see this?
Yes.
All right, the color wheel on this, what you can do is move this guy all around and find different color combinations. You can make it darker or lighter. Can you see what's happening with the color wheel in the background? And on this particular one, this is complementary. And we can go through and find different ones like triadic. What's the difference between the color triad and the complementary color? What do you see right away?
Complementary only uses 2 and triadic uses 3.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And there are 3 colors that are evenly spaced around the color wheel. What do you think tetrad would be?
4 colors.
Yeah, exactly. And we can see that it's 4 colors that are spaced evenly around. And what I want you to do for this assignment is to go through and just play with this for a while. And then come up with 3 different color schemas where you have different color combinations like analogous, monochromatic, complementary, any of those. You come up with 3 different ones, and then for each of those 3, use 2 different principal colors. So maybe this is your first one, maybe this is your second one for the analogous. For the triadic, maybe this is your first one, and this is your second one. Can you guys see what I'm saying? So by the end, you're going to have 6 different color combinations to work with. And it could be any one of those 4. If it's complementary, maybe red and green are your first one, and maybe that dirty yellow and the kind of indigo are in your second one. So when you pick 3 color combinations, complementary, monochromatic, analogous, triadic, or tetradic, and for each of those 3, you have 2 sets of colors, how many different combinations are you going to have?
6.
Yes, exactly. And which is convenient because we're going to make 6 different faces for our color tiles. Let's see, I'm going to stop sharing. And then I'm going to go back to Texture and color tiles. Let's see. Share again. This would go so much smoother if I knew what I was doing. Okay. All right, now we look at this. If we scroll down a bit, so the exercise for this is explore that color wheel and use 3 of the color combination sets, like triad, tetrad, complementary, etc. And for each of those 3, pick 2 color sets. So maybe one, your principal color is blue, the other one is purple, and that's true for your complementary, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you're going to have 6 different combinations of colors. And you can see in these individual images that people have made collages using those color schemes. And they've made their cubes from that. So that cardboard box that you got your kit in, you're going to cut that into 12 4-inch by 4-inch squares. 6 of those you're going to set aside for textures, and 6 of those you're going to set aside for color collages. And now we're going to go through the steps of what this project entails. So you've done your senses walk. When you come back from your senses walk, maybe you'll have some textures with you, maybe you won't. That doesn't matter. But what you're going to be doing is working on making texture collages with those 6 tiles, with 6 of those tiles. Now, if you look at the examples, you'll see that some people cut and manipulated cardboard to make their textures. Others used glued beads on. Some used different elements they found in their walks. But I want you to think about things, these need to take a little bit of time to make each of them. And I want you to think about creatively generating textures. You're not going to get any points for just taking beads and gluing them on, 12 beads evenly spaced. That would be horrible. But say you have a collection of beads that you found in the closet, you glue a layer down, you think, oh, well, that's not enough. You glue another layer on top of that with the clear glue so you can kind of see through the lower layer. That would be really interesting. Another thing that would be interesting is, say you glued a layer of beads down, you got some saran wrap that you glued on top of that, and then glued beads on top of that. Or maybe you you divide the beads into different sizes and shapes and glued them in kind of ribbons going along. So you make 2 layers of texture, one with the kind of a principal forms of one shape of beads, and then the secondary texture was all the little beads that made up those principal forms. Let's say you make one texture using bark, then you glue or paint tissue paper over the bark texture and glue beads on top of that. So, but do you kind of see what I'm talking about? You're kind of layering textures. You're creating a collage using textures to make it something that hopefully nobody's seen before, but also you're putting some time and effort into it to make it really interesting. Now, you'll also notice in the examples of that assignment that some students, we talked about making this monochromatic. And so they made the textures, cutting cardboard and moving it this way and that and gluing it here and making kind of a collage with that, and then spray painted the whole cube one color so all you could see was just the texture and you didn't see all the different elements that go into it. Let's say you're using some natural materials. Some of the things you can do would be, I don't know if you've ever used ryegrass in any of your things before, but if you're careful, you can kind of split that in half down the middle. And instead of just gluing the ryegrass, basically looks like a flat wheat on top of something. Since you split it down the middle, you can glue it with that center down, and then you have the seeds basically sticking up. And if you do several of those next to each other and fill the whole thing up with that kind of a texture, you get this really weird, bumpy, furry texture that looks more like coral than wheat or ryegrass. Another thing you can do, one student took a bunch of leaves, several different kinds of leaves, and she just tore them along the central vein. And then she glued that vein side down so that the leaf part stuck up and out. And when she was all done with all these layers of leaves glued like that, you had this really interesting undulating texture on the surface where you primarily just saw the outside edge of the leaf. You didn't see much of the flat part at all. So you can do different things like that. Or somebody else did the same kind of thing with the sycamore helicopters, where they got a whole bunch of those and glued them on edge, just smashing them together really tight, but gluing them on edge on the cardboard the tile that they made. So and I really like that kind of thinking where you're at kind of right angles to what everybody's expecting, because the easy answer would be to just take these things and glue them flat down on the tile, but that's not really interesting to do as an artist, and it's not really interesting for a viewer to see either. Like, so you can think of different ways to present the different textures that you find. Or say you want to develop cardboard textures. Several people have done really interesting things where they start creating designs peeling off the surface of corrugated cardboard, because when you peel off that surface, that flat surface, underneath you see the corrugation, you get some really interesting light and shadow play. And if you make kind of a textural design in the areas that you're peeling off, that can be really interesting too. Another thing that I've seen is several people have made have gotten that horrible cardboard that's on the back of the dollar store notebooks. That kind of thin cardboard, the gray pasteboard, where they would cut that into 4-inch squares and cut slightly different designs through several different sheets of them, stack them up, and glue that onto the cardboard tile. So you get this really interesting 3-dimensional picture. That ended up really cool. Another person, and this, if you're going to do something like this, it takes long enough. I would just do it on one of the tiles and then do something a little bit easier on the others. But what they did was they built kind of a dam around the edge of the tile. They put Elmer's clear drying glue down. When it dried, they used a marker to kind of paint a texture on it. Then after that dried, they put another layer of glue down and did the same thing and kept doing that. And when they got to just about 1/8 of an inch thick, it had already had 6 or 7 layers of glue and drawing on it. And it made this really interesting, ethereal, feathery kind of thing, where you saw through the clear layers of glue into the different layers of the color that had been applied. So as you do this, I want you to think about textures that you can do. Then I want you to think about how you could do those sideways. Then I want you to think about what would be interesting and challenging just to you. What would make this interesting for you to see if somebody else did it? And then use those kinds of textures on it. And like I said, if you're using purely physical textures, you can spray paint the whole thing one solid color when you're all done. And that can be really interesting if you're using a lot of different pieces of things. One person did this by smashing up a bunch of CDs and then taking those pieces and gluing them to the cardboard so that the sharp edges were facing out. And it looked fascinating because even though each of those pieces looked kind of sharp and dangerous, layering them like that almost looked like a weird alien fur of some sort. So, there's different kinds of things that you can think about. Now for the color, there's a couple of things I recommend for the color collages. And these I recommend rather strongly. You did see the kind of solid colors that people were doing with felt and stuff like that, and it's very interesting. But you guys are professional artists. You know how to work with things. You can make something that's much more interesting than 6 pieces of felt glued to cardboard. So what I would recommend is see if you can find old magazines that have color photos in them. Sometimes you can get some at Dollar Tree, or Desert Industries has old magazines that you can get pretty cheap. if you're going to be getting them from anybody, I would recommend heartily that you ask permission first before you remove them from their original owners, because you are going to be cutting them up and making them into collages. And I would another good thing to do is go to hardware stores like Lowe's or Home Depot, and even Walmart. Go to their paint counter and look at their paint samples. Oh, the little dog is scratching on the door again. We're going to go for a short walk. Sigh. But if you're going to be doing this, I recommend very strongly that you go to at least 2 or 3 different stores, because otherwise, if you get all the paint chips from one store, they'll probably kick you out. Even though the stuff is free, you don't want to take advantage of it. Come on, little guy. She is really cute, but she's kind of annoying. But I mean that in the most positive way. There's 2 Chihuahuas. One is kind of laid back, and the other one, like, she's the one that likes scratching on doors and everything. And if you're not paying attention to her in the right way at the right time, she can be a little bit of a troublemaker. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. All right. And what I would recommend with the paints, going to the store and getting the paint samples, also look at design idea books. Lowe's and Home Depot are both really good about having design idea books. Keep in mind the color combinations that you were thinking of, the tetrad, triad, that kind of stuff, and the colors you wanted to use. And the reason why I recommend the paint chips and the color style magazines that these stores have is because you can use those to cut little pieces out for the color mosaics you're going to make. So I would recommend maybe sketching out a little bit of an idea for each of these color collages of what you want to do with the color schemes that you have in mind. Go through your magazines and find pages that have colors in the photos that you're looking at. And there's a lot that can be very interesting because you can get a lot of really interesting visual textures. And then also reference those paint chips and cut elements out of the paint chips. One thing that is really interesting to me is people have cut these up into tiny little squares and made a mosaic, pretty much color tile mosaics with the paint chips. And if you're going to, when you do this, you need to cover the entire surface of this 4-inch by 4-inch cardboard tile. And as you do it, again, think about visually what would be interesting to you. 3 pieces of solid colors is not going to do it. But doing something where you cut them into like little 3/8 squares, you cut them into strips, and kind of weave the strips together, gradually changing the colors so it's an exploration of the color combination and color setup you picked. Or even I know a couple people took hole punches and punched just a bunch of little holes out of the colors chips. We're going to do monochromatic, punching that out of several different shades of one color, and then putting that together in a mosaic with squares and circles. That can be really interesting. Since you need to cover the entire surface, sometimes it's really good to go over, glue everything down, look at it, then go over and glue stuff down on top of that. So you're layering it. If you're using magazine cutouts, it's really nice to make a design with that. And these things should have several different pieces of paper in them. They should never have just like one piece of paper that's a cool photo. These are supposed to be mosaics or collages, so keep that in mind as you design this. And again, make it so that it would be interesting to you if you saw it and somebody else had done it. Okay? And you're just exploring 6 different color combinations and color schemes in these 6 different color tiles. And then you'll glue both these sets together into 2 cubes, and that's what you'll take pictures of and turn in. And the 2 cubes, you can put like 2 texture tiles in one and 4 in the other, or mix and match, or you can do like a lot of the samples did. They did all the colors in 1 cube and all the textures in another cube. Either, you can do that either way you want. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you submit 2 photos. Each photo shows 3 faces of the 2 different cubes, so that when you submit the 2 photos, we can see all 6 faces of both cubes all together, just like in the sample photos that I have. So again, as you do this, try really hard not to make it super easy. Instead, try to make it so that it's interesting for you and interesting for somebody potentially looking at it. Okay. I have had people turn in a cube that had for the complementary, they had 2 strips of paper on it that were the complementary colors, and sadly they did not get a spectacular grade. But I'm going to share and show you. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, if we look at this a little bit, as you look at this, you can kind of see that the simpler ones are not as well done as the little bit more complicated ones. Like if you can you see this one that has the purple, the different shades of purple on it?
Yeah.
Can you guys? Okay. I like that an awful lot better than this one that has the yellow and green, because the different shades of purple have several different pieces of paper kind of graduating that intensity of purple. And that's always more interesting than if it's just 3 simple pieces of paper. And like in the middle towards the top, you can see the person took time to make a collage with different colors. That is going to be a lot better. I think where my arrow is right now and the one next to it, both of those with the white texture cube turned out really well. And then a little bit to the right, the person, thumbs up for the felt, but the ideas were good. They could have gone a lot more, could have gone farther and gotten a better grade doing more with that idea of the felt. Like right here, you see they only used like 3 pieces of felt, and we want to have, you guys are professional artists, we want to have a nice collage. The collage doesn't have to be a picture of anything, but I think that these 2 photos with that white cube in it are much better. I'm going to try to edit this tonight so that those show up a lot better, so that they're bigger and you can see them easier. And I think that will really help. So these are not all good examples, but some of them are really quite good examples. But just keep in mind what we've been talking about regarding color and applying texture and different things like that. Now, I did want to talk a little tomorrow, or next week, not tomorrow. Next week, we are going to talk a little bit more about contemporary art and a couple different things. In contemporary art, we're going to talk about ready-mades, and we're also going to talk about wrapping. With both of these things, I think fit into contemporary art. Have either of you looked at the background for module 6 of the contemporary art?
No, I haven't.
Okay, one of the artists that I really, really like, it's an artist team, Jean-Claude and Christo. They're the ones that are famous for wrapping things with plastic. And after they both died, they wrapped something, I think it was Arc de Triomphe, that was approved, that was wrapped in plastic according to their designs. And you think about that, wrapping with plastic, big deal. Anybody can do that. And most of us do that whenever there's a birthday that comes up. We wrap something with something else. But what is fascinating to me is you look at this power couple. They did a lot of sketches and paintings with different objects, planning out what kind of ropes that they would use, how the ropes would be tied, where the knots would be tied. So they invested a lot of effort trying to design something that visually was interesting, that was not just throwing a plastic tarp over something else. And they're, even though they didn't spout a lot of rhetoric or propaganda in their pieces themselves, they didn't need to really do that because there was a lot of powerful messages just in the work itself. By wrapping something, it seems really odd that that would really attract a lot of attention, doesn't it? Why do you think people are so fascinated with stuff that they can't see readily?
Maybe it's like the mystery just kind of leaves it to the imagination.
Yeah, exactly. It's the monkey mind. We are continually curious. We can't help it. That's part of our hardwired makeup as human beings. And when you tell, what is fascinating to me is that you can put a tray of candy in a room with kids and not say anything about it, and they won't do anything until the moment you say, nobody can have this. Then all of a sudden, everybody's staring at it, and they all want it. There was a pilot who said that one of the surest ways to crash into something is to focus on it and tell yourself you don't want to hit it. And he said the reason is because that explodes in focus in your mind so much that you can't think of anything else, even though you're not supposed to have it. And I think that that's a big indicator of the monkey mind. So when we hide something from somebody, our first reaction is, oh, there's a mystery, just like Tanner said, we want to explore it. I like that because it becomes kind of an intellectual and sometimes an emotional engagement with whatever the object is when parts of it are hidden. Jean-Claude and Christo did a project where they took models and they wrapped these women in plastic, did things so it looked like they weren't able to breathe because the plastic appeared to be over their head and stuff like that. Then they tied ropes around the plastic to hold it in place, and it was a series of performance pieces and photographs. And it's really fascinating when you look this kind of stuff up online. A lot of people were really upset about it, but one of the things that they were trying to do is have us think a little bit more about the fashion industry in Europe and North America. What kind of questions would somebody have when they see a professional model wrapped up in a tarp with ropes tied around it? What are some of the thoughts that you might have coming to that? I think one thing that Tanner talked about, there's a lot of mystery because sometimes the only thing you could see was a person's hand or a foot. And a lot of the body contours are hidden and very faintly expressed just through the layers of plastic. What are some of the other questions that somebody might have or observations?
It's like you try and piece together like why these certain materials may be on this certain person.
Yeah, that's a really good one. What are some other questions? That's excellent.
Some observations I would make. I've been listening to some crime podcasts lately, and so that kind of brings to mind, what terrible things people will do to other people, and then, okay, what does that say about that imagery making me think of that, and then also knowing that this is about the fashion industry, kind of making connections there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to unpack and to think about. Ideas like sometimes when we seek to preserve stuff, we're endangering it. Like the plastic tarp covering her face or her head. Sometimes when ropes can be used to hold things in place, but they can also be used to bind people. There's in the effort of preserving or making this person that has become a thing in the eyes of the industry, by applying layers of protection, there's also so many layers of hindrance. And there's these kinds of questions, the questions that Kylie brought out, questions Tanner brought out. But it's fascinating to me because the object itself is still the same person, but by wrapping it with something as simple as plastic and rope and taking photos of that, we are completely transforming a person's relationship, a viewer's relationship with whatever that person or the object is that's being wrapped. And I think that those are really important questions to be thinking about. Another thing that we're going to be talking about next week is ready-mades. Have you guys heard that term before?
Yes.
Do you remember the context?
I'm not entirely sure. What I want to say is, well, it's something that's already been made and then is appropriated for art. It makes me think of the fountain. I don't know if that's true for.
No, that's perfect. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that is exactly where I was hoping you'd go with this. What was the fountain was the first ready-made sculpture that was presented as something other than what it was intended to be. And oh, this is so frustrating. The guy's name is on the tip of my tongue, and I completely forgot what his name was. Marcel Duchamp, that's it. Marcel Duchamp, it was a member of that crew of artists that kind of started things like Dadaism and things like that. In the early 20th century, they were really trying to get people to think about what art is and what art means. Their perspective was essentially that art is kind of an examination of meaning through a sideways journey, where you look at a painting by Mary Cassatt, who painted in an impressionist style very genre type scenes, usually involving parents and children. And she was using just an explosion of color that was not very realistic, but comes together in her paintings in ways that are just absolutely fantastic to see, because it gives a vibrancy to these otherwise rather plain and boring scenes. So she was getting people to examine domestic life in different ways than what we normally dismiss it as being by the use of her art. And that was what the Dadaists and everybody else, they were trying to get people to re-examine this whole idea of what art is and what creation is through these kinds of sideways processes. During the 1800s, after the real growth of the Industrial Revolution, there was this huge growing population of middle-income people. All these people that were not royalty or nobility had money to spend, and there were a lot of markets that sprang up to give people opportunities to spend that money. And this kind of economic environment was perfect for what became the gallery system in France. Everybody had to go to France if you were a painter, because what these galleries found is that every season they could pick specific artists with specific styles or specific color palettes and present them as whatever is in for the time being. If you want to be with the cool kids or the popular crowd, this was the stuff that was in. What does that sound like today? It very much sounds like what the fashion industry has become. But this gallery system, artists were made or broken because of their relationship with gallery owners, with whether or not their work fit I use that with huge, gigantic foam finger air quotes into what the gallery expectations were presented as for that season. A lot of the times, if you couldn't afford the artwork that you saw in this or that gallery, you could go on down the streets and find student painters that could do something in very similar styles that they knew were popular at that gallery, and you could get them at quite a bit less expensive cost. But that whole system was set up not to really support the arts, but so that people could control what people thought was valuable in the arts. And that system went on for a couple generations. And so you get Marcel Duchamp and a lot of his friends who looked at that and despised this fact that people who were hopeful artists would have their souls carefully sucked from their bodies and all their motivation destroyed because they could not fit into the gallery scene expectations. So that was the environment that Dadaism came into. And Marcel Duchamp said, well, there's other things that make up art too. You know, what you're told is art. A lot of the times people will say that that's art. What you expect to be art becomes art. But sometimes things are beautifully designed in and of themselves and are utterly dismissed because they are not, air quote, art. And so he was walking by an apartment that was being renovated, went inside, happened to find this discarded toilet, and took that, painted on it the fountain in French with enamel paint, and at the next gallery opening, he set that up on a pedestal. How do you imagine the gallery owners would respond to something like that?
Big eye
Can't
roll.
imagine they were too jazzed.
I'm sorry, what was that? Say that again. Both of you?
I just said a big eye roll.
Yeah, okay. Excellent. And Tanner, what did you say?
I said I couldn't imagine they'd be too jazzed about it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because it's easily identifiable as a fountain. And the first message that Marcel Duchamp was conveying, I think most likely, was that art is not art simply because somebody presents it to you as art. But he's also saying sometimes art is art because somebody has removed it from its everyday context, presented it within a new context, and displayed it as art. So, you know, you think about toilets and fountains, toilets and urinals and things like that are beautifully designed. They are one of the finest genres of functional ceramics that cultures ever produce. So that's one way of looking at it. But from another way of looking at it is that Marcel Duchamp took something that everybody wants to dismiss because we all despise the need to use them. But when you present it as art, suddenly people start scratching their heads and thinking, well, maybe I've been wrong. And that's one of the things that we're going to be examining. That's something that I think is absolutely beautiful about conceptual art. With the art that we've been doing, what are some of the media that we've worked with the last couple of weeks?
Foam, paper, cardboard.
Yeah, lots of different kinds of stuff. And the difference between conceptual art and what we've been doing so far is that when we carve in foam, the medium we're working with is foam. The tool that we're using is a file or a knife. For conceptual art, the tools that you're using are the foam carvings or the sculpture or the situations you set up or the environment you set up or the pedestal and the fountain. And the medium that you're working with as a 3D designer or a sculptor or an artist is the actual thoughts that people have about that thing, how they respond, what their internal concepts are. That's the medium that you're working with when you're dealing with conceptual art. So that's a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be doing talking more about next week. Well, I hope that this has been a benefit to you today, and we are going to meet again next Tuesday. Do you guys have any questions about any of the stuff that we've talked about today, or about what you're seeing on the assignments?
Mine's just a clarification. It's that the 6, I guess 12 cubes or like tiles we make will become the cubes, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Each cube will have 6 faces. So you'll cut the 12 tiles to make 2 different cubes, with 6 of those faces being texture and 6 of those faces being color collage. Did that make it clear as mud?
Clear as mud, yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. If you think you've got a handle on the assignment and you would love to be confused, please let me know and I will do my best. Or maybe the other way around, either way. Kylie, do you have any questions about stuff we've talked about?
I don't think I have any in mind right now.
Okay. All right, well, good. And this is an open invitation for everybody who's watching this. Please do the critiques as soon as you can and get those turned in. There's some really nice stuff posted to the discussions. And next week, it might be interesting too, as we start doing the texture and color tiles. And then the week after that, it might be fascinating to do something on one of the conceptual art pieces. One thing I did change was in the discussion for the contemporary art, which will be the found objects presentations. I want everybody to not only share what you've done in the discussion, but also to comment with a 25-word comment on 3 other works by other students. And those comments should be dealing with one of the 4 tools of artistic critique. And those 4 tools are describe, analyze, interpret, and evaluate. And we'll talk about that more again when we get to it next week. But I did add that little bit so that everybody will comment. I want everybody to see what everybody else comes up with. One of the things that I want to mention really quick is I don't really care whether or not you buy into the idea of conceptual art. There are many artists that think it's a bunch of baloney, and that is completely fine. The reality is that everything that we create that people react to on some level is conceptual art, because the fact of its creation and existence affects the person who perceives it on some level. But whether or not you believe that conceptual art is a real thing, just do the project, and maybe you'll change your mind or not. I had one student where I had everybody design a conceptual art project for them to do. She thought it was a bunch of baloney, and she came to class one day with all these articles talking about how much conceptual art was a bunch of baloney. And I said, okay, that's perfectly fine. You still need to do the project. So why don't you set up a project that proves it's a bunch of baloney? And it was, sparks started going off behind her eyeballs and everything, and she got really excited. What she did was took $6 to DI, bought $6 worth of just random objects. She contacted myself and a couple other people to give her highfalutin sounding titles that she wrote down on strips of paper and just randomized them in a bowl. And then she got one of those banquet tables and got just some cheap plastic tablecloth stuff to put over it. And there happened to be a neighborhood party. So she set this up at the neighborhood party, randomly selected the objects and set them down in a row on this table, and then randomly pulled titles out of their bowl and put those titles in front of each of these objects. And then she asked people just to tell her what they thought about her artwork. And she said it was absolutely fascinating to hear how much meaning people put into this thing that she had taken absolutely no thought about putting together. One person got really angry with her because they thought, oh, finally, my mom has got this art thing down. And then when she got upset because she found that her mom had completely randomized the objects and the titles both. But it did a great job of conceptualizing that whole conversation that she had about conceptual art being nonsense. And I thought it was a brilliant project. You guys don't have to do a project like that. You just have to work with a ready-made object. But it is something to think about, how stuff like this can change people's perceptions of what art is and their expectations about what art can be. Well, if you guys don't have any other questions or anything, we're going to wrap up for tonight. I'm going to post this, and then I will see you guys. Oh, and Kylie, you're the one who told me that I had hit the wrong button last time and had not posted this. So thank you very much for that. And I will get this posted online as soon as we can so you guys can get credit for attendance. All right. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.